I want to make sure on this Saturday morning that we finish on time, because I'm sure we all have lots of other things to do, like, crawl under a blanket and enjoy the dreary weather today. So it's good to see you guys. Thanks for coming out. My name's Miranda Collins. I work for the convention. But before that, I have been in education for 23 years. This past 10 years, I've served at Classical Christian School in Topeka as the grammar school principal. So I was over kindergarten through 6th grade students. But lots and lots of experience in the public school setting as well, including, which is what we're going to talk about today, being certified in special ed. And so this is near and dear to my heart, just being able to work with kids with all different needs. So I gave you two different resources. The handout with the slides is what you're going to see up on the screen, so feel free to take notes. That's why I made it as with lines next to it. And then I tried to give you like one per church, a resource that we will reference every so often, but this is also just a downloadable ebook that I wanted to make sure that I gave you, called Be All In, and it is a guide by Sandra Peebles, and I'll talk a little bit more about her throughout the presentation, but I will also make sure that I have all of your email addresses and send all of these things in links so that you're able to have the electronic copies or point you to where you can get all that. So what we're going to talk about today is what we should know, and hopefully, I put this in quotation or in parentheses, what we should do about disability ministry. And the reason why I had encouraged Jeff to include everyone is because disability ministry is not just kid-centered, right? It's not just kid-focused. It really should be an idea, a focus that starts at birth and goes all the way to glory, right? We should know and be able to support families and adults who have special needs, and we're going to see that they are more and more frequently diagnosed, which means they're going to be more and more frequently showing up in your churches. And so what we're going to do today is not, I really want to say this clearly, this is not something that I'm telling you you should do immediately and it should be all out and everything that I show you is exactly what you have to do tomorrow, okay? I never want to do that. Every church that's represented here has very different needs, different structures, different support opportunities and abilities. So what I want you to do today is simply to listen, and I want it to spur a conversation of what's our next step. If my church, if I know we really don't do anything when it comes to supporting families and kids with special needs, what's our next step? Can we have a group that talks about it? Can we start with one thing that I hear from this presentation today? If you are already doing some things, then what's your next step? Do I need to, make sure that it's going from kids to youth to adult, right? So what is my next step? So this is not, I know sometimes when I go to things, I get really overwhelmed and I think I can't do all that. We're not big enough. We don't have the money. We don't have the space, right? That's not at all what this is. I simply just want to educate you a little bit on what you're going to see in your churches and then encourage you to start the conversation to support these families. And I'm going to tell you why that's really important here in our next few verses. So in a recent study by Lifeway, this was done in 2022, I believe. They tend to do studies every 2 years. They surveyed 2,500 Protestant pastors at different churches across the country. And one of the questions that they asked pastors was, this was a pastor's perspective, this is their opinion, a person with disabilities would feel welcome at my church, right? We would hope that this number is high, as you can see it is. So you can see that with pastors, 99% of pastors at these churches agree that people with disabilities or a family with disabilities would feel welcome at my church. They also surveyed the church goers. That means the people who were attending those same churches. And again, really high percentage, 97% of people sitting in the pews would say, yeah, of course, they're welcome. They would definitely feel welcome at my church. The more the merrier, happy to have them. But what we see that, did I lose it? Oop. There we go. What the research actually shows us, and this was research done a little bit earlier, so in 2003, so I think that this is actually probably a little bit worse. I always say that, but unfortunately we see that research typically gets worse, not better, as we're surveying. But according to parents, so these are the actual families that the pastors and the people in the church were discussing, fewer than 1/2 of children and youth with autism, deaf and blindness, intellectual disabilities, and multiple disabilities participated in religious group activities at any point during the year. That's the year. So less than 50% of children in the United States with some type of disability actually went to church at least once in a year. That's pretty sad. That's really, really sad, less than half. And when we asked more than 200 parents of adolescents, so now we're into youth groups, adolescents and young adults who had autism, they were asked about their children's attendance. Less than 1/3, so less than 33%, reported that they actually went on a weekly basis, and furthermore, only 11% of youth and adults with autism would attend social events more than once or twice a month. So what we're seeing is that there is actually a gap between what pastors believe about how welcoming their church is versus what actual special needs families and people with disabilities actually experience and believe about what their churches are doing and how they are welcoming. So there is an actual disconnect there. If we believed that people are welcome, then we should see that 97 to 99%, but we're actually seeing 1/3 of that. We're seeing less than 33%. So really quickly, with the people at your table, really quickly, why do we think that there is a disconnect between what pastors and churchgoers are saying, that they believe they're totally welcome, they should feel welcome, everything should be welcoming, and what families with disabilities are actually experiencing? Take 30 seconds. Why do you think there's a disconnect there? Why do we think there's a gap? So here's a question. When pastors and people in the church say that they are welcome at our church, what do you think that they mean by that?
We smile and say hi.
That's right? We welcome them. Of course, everybody's welcome, right? We would never say no to someone who wants to come to church. Why, I think I heard Susan say this, why do we think families actually obviously experience the opposite? Susan, what were you saying? I think I heard you say it. Okay, we don't know what they need, number one, education, right? What's the other, what do you think is also happening? If we don't know it, then what are we doing? We're not really doing much. That's right, we're not exhibiting that point, right? For a family with a child or if anybody with disabilities, welcome isn't enough, right? Because is that actually creating environments that allow them to be comfortable or allow them to feel safe or allow them to be supported in what those needs actually are, right? So I think that's the disconnect. Everyone has great intentions. I don't ever believe that anybody in church would look at a family walking in with a student, with autism and say, oh, sorry, not today. Not today. They would never do that. However, sitting in a church setting, if that child is outbursts, or if that child starts to run, or if that child in the back with kids ministry is tearing things up, or just not listening, or not participating, right? Would we have some tension in the room? I'll say that at my church, we do have tension with it. And so that's part of the education process, is what does that look like to make sure that that family knows it's okay and we're gonna do things to help kind of make it easier for your family to be here. Because here's what I know, after talking with the families at my church, they're embarrassed. They're They feel singled out. They don't feel seen. We love them, but they don't feel like people actually understand what they're going through day in and day out, depending on the severity of their child's needs. They're just lonely. And so if we are not doing more to actually go out of our way to connect with them and say, no, we see you, we love you, and we want to help you in whatever way we can, they're not going to feel welcome in a church. They're going to feel just like they feel in a restaurant or in a grocery store or in a school setting even, right? Like they're constantly fighting. It's a war every day between their children and the people who are trying to support them. So we want to just try to change that a little bit if we can. So what I want you to do really quickly is I am going to show you what kind of kids are we talking about, right? I think sometimes we think that there are certain kids that we absolutely can know exactly what's happening. But I want you to understand when we talk about disabilities, what's the range of what you might experience in your church? So let's take a look. Oops, there we go. At what kids are we talking about, what students? All right, so we have some different types of disabilities. We have special needs and what we call special needs disabilities. That includes autism, which we now know is a spectrum. When I first started 25 years ago, we did not talk about a spectrum. But now we know that we have very high functioning autistic people, right? Super smart, but just have some different quirks and needs, all the way to nonverbal, fully 100% needs support, will probably never live alone autism. So there is a large spectrum of what that looks like. We have students with Down syndrome. That's an easily recognizable one. But again, Down syndrome has a spectrum. So we have highly capable Down syndrome people, all the way down to, again, needing full support. Cerebral palsy, intellectual disabilities, being deaf or blind, other physical and cognitive disabilities. And then this one is really interesting, sensory processing. This is a new one that we're really finding is more and more. So I joke with my husband that I think he has a little bit of this, right? Loud noises, he can't, like it sends him into fight or flight. If you've ever had it or met a kiddo who can't stand tags or can really feel the sock, right? I know when my son doesn't like socks that have the line across the toe. He can feel it. So all kinds of different sensory issues. Maybe you have a child that's constantly doing this, or maybe you have a kid who likes to chew their sweater, right? Those are all kind of sensory processing. It's a way of regulating, and it's a way of making sense in the world, and certain things will trigger and certain things will soothe. So it just depends on the needs of that child. Then we get into things that are a little bit harder to see. Most of the time you can see the things that are at the top level, but learning disabilities are ones that we don't see outwardly. Typically. So you're going to have dyslexia. So we've all heard that. We've known about that. So that is a disability with processing written language on a page. So I might see the letters differently. It is not just an easy, like I flip my B's and my D's. No, dyslexia has a big range of the way that I see the text. Some kids might see floating letters. Other kids might rearrange words. Some kids might rearrange letters. Some kids might see different colors of letters. It's a very interesting way of looking at how we read. Some other things, dysgraphia. So that's actually the ability to take what's in my mind and put it down on paper. So these are students who are going to struggle with writing. They cannot complete a worksheet. They're not able to put down my thoughts onto page with written pen or paper. So with a lot of students with dysgraphia, we're using things like talk to text, and we're using technology now, which is beautiful, to allow them to communicate without having to actually write it on a paper. You're going to have other oral and written language disorders, and then you're going to have executive functioning deficits. So these are going to be kids who, I have one of these children who they put things down, they walk away, and they can't remember, well, where did I put that thing, 10 seconds ago. It's gone. I'm out of my mind. These are kids who are always disorganized. This might be kids who run late. This might be kids who never bring their Bible to church, no matter how many times you remind them, right? Could be a kid who can't match clothing, just keeping up with executive functioning. That's all the kind of the responsibility side of things. And then we're going to have some mental health and behavioral diagnosis. This is actually probably what you have the most of, and a lot of times it's even undiagnosed. So our two big ones, ADD and ADHD. So ADD is just the ability to focus, so that's the attention deficit. So I'm going to stare at the lights, I'm going to stare at the ceiling, I'm going to zone out, I'm going to think about rainbows and petting my dog when I get home today. I'm not going to listen, I'm going to be out somewhere else. And then ADHD is the hyperactivity model. So that's going to be kids who have problems sitting still, who need a little bit more constant movement, who tend to be wired no matter what, right? And so that actually leads them to not being able to focus. Then you're going to have things like ODD. That's going to be really hard in a church setting. ODD is oppositional defiance. So that's going to be a child who just constantly does not obey. And it is a known cognitive deficit. It's not them just being, strong-willed or, being defiant for the sake of defiant. They actually have a cognitive disability that does not allow them to tend to follow things in the order of things. You're going to have a lot of trauma. So these are kids who have had adverse childhood experiences. Maybe mom and dad are divorced. Maybe I had a grandparent close to me who died recently. Some trauma will be short-term. Some trauma will be long-lasting. And so you're going to have to know that there's going to be some things that happen with a child that can change their behaviors, whether it's short-term or long-term. Social anxiety, that and OCD. So those are things where we think, oh, that kid's just shy. Yeah, but there's an actual anxiousness that's underlying them where they cannot regulate themselves in a large group setting. So it takes them a lot more time, and they have to feel safe. And then OCD will present itself in a lot of ways: hand washing, having to do things in multiple repetitions, always having to have the same toy when they show up to play, right? If someone else has my toy, I'm going to have a breakdown, those kinds of things. So thinking about all of those disabilities and needs really quickly, especially if you're with someone that you're working with, and if you're not, just kind of jot this down on your list. You don't have to name names unless you obviously are working with the people who are at your church, but make a list right now of how many kids do you know for a fact, or you could probably go ahead and diagnose if you've never been told, that have some type of need based on this list. Go ahead and work on that real quick. You got about 2 minutes. Make a list if you can, and then I'll share mine as well. I don't have this in here, but if you ever said, I've got this one kid, I'm telling you they're on this list, right? So if you've ever said, I got this one kid, right, they're probably on this list. So think about what you might have represented at your church. Just take a couple seconds. Again, we're not doing this because we're trying to label kids and we're trying to, assume that there's some kind of issue, but knowledge is important, right? We have to go into situations with our kids understanding that I'm not going to walk into a room and expect that every child is going to receive things in the exact same way. So if I know something about a student, I'm able to relate to them better, right? Jesus knew the people that he was talking to. He was given that information by the Lord, but he knew the woman at the well, and he everything that he talked about with that woman was based around his prior knowledge of her, right? He knew the people that he worked with. And so knowing your students helps with that relationship. It helps that family feel connected. You guys share with me, just name some of the things that you guys see. Obviously no names, but autism, ADD, okay? Yes, learning disabilities. How about you?
Autism and kids with Down syndrome.
Mm-hmm. Do you guys have anybody that? Yes, so probably an ODD thing, maybe. That one's hard to tell because sometimes it is just a dysregulation, but it's not like an actual ODD. So you just have to, Yeah, we all get mad and throw things every so often. It's hard, that one's hard to know. I don't know about y'all. How about you guys? Yeah. Good. Sensory, yes, it's a big one. Yeah. Yeah, I know. So I wrote down just for our church, and we're a church plant, we're 5 years old, but I had made this list a couple weeks before I did this training in August, and we have, starting from babies all the way up, we have a hard of hearing baby. She's now 2 years old, but she has hearing aids. We have 2 Down syndrome children. We have 3 autistic children, and 1 is nonverbal. We have 1 dyslexic child that I know of. I don't assume to know every learning disability with kiddos. We have several ADHD children. We have one that is severely developmentally delayed. Love him to death, but he's in 3rd grade, but probably functions more like a 4-year-old. In just his ability to learn and process. And then we have 1 teenager who is in a wheelchair. She has what's called ADNP, which is a genetic disorder. So she is still on a feeding tube. The mind of probably a 6-month-old, but her family is there every week, and she sits in the service with them. And I will tell you that one's been probably the hardest for our church, and I'll tell you why, because she, as a toddler, right, or less than a toddler, as a baby will do, she is very loud. She blows raspberries, she makes noises, she moves, and there are moments, right in the middle of a sermon where she's really distracting. And my husband's the pastor, and so he has made comments about how hard that is. And, nothing to be mean about it or anything, but it's how do we balance that tension? How do we, I've told him, like, we have to make them feel welcome, and this is their life, this is what we do. And they're very kind. If it gets really bad, they will take her out into the lobby and sit with her for a minute. But I love that our church family is feeling the tension, because she's made in the image of God just like everyone else. And so we want them to know that it's okay. Evangeline now comes into Bible study in my class on Wednesday nights because her mom's in my class. And, we all talk to her, we all say hello to her, and she makes noises, and it's loud, and sometimes I just turn the volume up on the video when we're watching it, and we move on, right? Like, this is what the church family needs to do. We need to because I could make her feel really bad. I could make the mom feel really bad. Like, hey, do you mind? She's being really loud. Can you take her out? That's not what we're here to do. We're trying to support her in the things that she's doing. And sometimes her feeding tube thing will make noises, and it's a lot. I don't want to ever have to be in that situation that mom's going through. Her life will never look normal, because Evangeline will never grow out of that. So we want to support them. So a lot of things that we're going to talk about today are coming from this new book called Accessible Church. I put this here, and then I'll give you the website where you can find it. Sandra Peebles is actually a leading disability ministry trainer now for the SBC. She started this journey 20 plus years ago when her son was born, and he is a nonverbal autistic child. He is now in his early 20s, I believe, still lives at home, but she, going to a very small SBC church, of course, had to be thrust into what is autism. 20 plus years ago, we didn't even have the research that we have now. And so she has spent her whole life learning about how to support her son, and in turn, how to get her church to support her son, because she really, has a heart for kids with special needs, and how are they going to be handled in the church setting. And so that's her life work. She just came out with this book called Accessible Church. She's going around and doing a lot of trainings now at different conventions. She'll be at the annual meeting this summer in Orlando, but she has a great website that I'll show you. But a lot of this information that you're going to see today is coming from her book, based on her experiences and her knowledge of how this looks. So let's get started real quick. When we think about a disability ministry, we all need to understand the theology of disability, right? This isn't about actions, it's about worldview and beliefs. And so when we have a theology of disability, we are going to see our ministry models in view of that theology. So do we truly believe that every person is made in the image of God and has the potential to have a relationship with him, right? We don't know what the levels of understanding are with kids with disabilities, but we do know, number one, that God created them, and we do believe that there are moments that they will have understanding of some type of message that we bring them. And we do know that the Lord provides, right, that if they're never able to fully understand a saving relationship with Jesus Christ, then we know they're going to heaven. So how do we help them understand the kingdom here in whatever capacity they are able to understand it? In Exodus 4:11, the Lord said to Moses, "Who has made man's mouth? Who makes him mute or deaf or seeing or blind? Is it not I, the Lord?" And then, of course, the passages we always talk about, Psalm 139, "For you formed my inward parts. You knitted me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works. My soul knows it very well." We know that disability exists because we live in a fallen world, but it also is a means by which God displays his glory and his grace, right? I look at kids with disabilities, and some of them are the most joyful, happy kids I've ever seen, and way more than I will ever be. And I just think, thank you, Lord. You're showing your glory through this wonderful child who has some amazing joy that I probably won't have. Disability is not a mistake. It's not a mistake in God's design. It isn't a punishment for sin, right? We know that. Jesus clarifies that. How is it the parents' fault? And Jesus says, no, this is for my glory that these things happen. Obviously, we live in a broken world. So disability is a part of sin, just like everything else that we see. So please, if you ever have a family who feels guilty or wonders, what did I do wrong, right? This is a part of God's plan. He didn't cause it, he didn't make it, but he will bring good out of it. And so we can encourage them to know that this was not, poor mamas, we already have enough guilt and problems. Now it's Tylenol, right? Like everything, we can't do anything right. So please don't ever heap that on families who are struggling with the problems that they're having with their kids. I love this. Fearfully and wonderfully made applies to wheelchairs, feeding tubes, and sign language too. Right? And so that just reminded me of Evangeline, that she is fearfully and wonderfully made. And we know that. So why is theology of disability important? Well, it actually has the potential to reach a significant portion of the population. So this was really impactful to me. According to a recent census, 2 in 7 families has a member of their family with a disability. 2 in 7. So if you've got, 30 plus families in your church, then you're going to have at least 4 to 5 families who are affected by some type of disability. Across the country, 13% of students on average are identified as needing special education. If I can tell you this, that's just who gets special education. That percentage is much higher of who actually has a disability. Special education now in America, it's very hard to get in because there are so many kids with so many needs, they can't handle all of the support. So that's actually kind of a lower number. If you add in kids with learning disabilities and mental health and diagnosis who are on 504 plans, if you're not familiar with that, a 504 does not give them a full, what's called an IEP, which is an individualized education plan, meaning they have a significant disability. A 504 plan basically is accommodation, so it's what we're going to do in the classroom to help them still be in the regular classroom. More time, different texts, those kinds of things, but it's not actually an education plan. But if you add all those kids in, kids with ADHD are going to get a 504. They're not going to get an IEP, most likely, right? Then it's close to 20% of the kids in your school district have some type of learning disability. So whichever school district, whichever area you're ministering in, we typically say that whatever the population of students in your school district looks like, it's going to mimic itself in your churches. Might not be to the full extent, but you can probably assume that between 15 and 20% of your students, if that's your number in your school district, will show up somehow in your church as well. So why is that important? Well, here's the kicker. Close to 80% of those who are impacted by a disability do not attend church. 80%. That makes disability families an unchurched and in many cases an unreached people group. So when we talk about sending missionaries overseas and we're going to find new unreached people groups, guess what? We have a big one right here in our neighborhoods and in our cities. It is families with disabilities. They are not going to church. 80%, that's huge, right? That's huge. And so if that doesn't spur you on to say, what can we do? I don't know what will, because that's a huge number, right? If I told you that if you just welcomed and did a little bit of stuff in your church to get some of these people into your church, you would want to do that the same way we would want to do it for atheists and Buddhists and Muslims, and this is a people group that we should be reaching. So this applies to the functional and the social aspects of disability. So if you have not heard of this before, when we talk about disability, we mean two different things. Functional is actually the impairment itself. So that means what are we doing to understand the child's actual disability. But then we have a social aspect when it comes to church, right? We have the treatment of that person and that family. We can't mitigate the functional disability, meaning we're not called to fix that child with ADHD or to help that child with dyslexia. That's not our jobs at church. We are not educators. We are not specialists or therapists. That's not going to be our job. But we can build a church community that decreases the social barriers that they're experiencing so that they know that the church is a safe place for them and their families, right? They get social stuff all over the place. If we can be that place where they walk in and they just take a deep breath and they go, okay, these are my people. They love my kids no matter what. We can help with that part of the situation that they're experiencing. We know in Matthew 21, in Jesus' last days, he broke down barriers. We see him do this in the temple with people who had disabilities and could not access the temple because of their lameness or their deafness or their muteness. And he built a community around this, being able for them to be able to be a part of the temple, because we know the temple was their place. That's their community. If they were an outcast, it was because they weren't allowed to be a part of the church. When he healed them, he didn't just fix their physical, right? We see this. He didn't just fix their ability to walk or their ability to speak or hear. He actually restored them back to their communities who had said, you're not worthy enough to be here, right? They had been shunned. So Jesus was not just thinking about the physical. He was thinking about their desire to be a part of a body. And that's what we're called to do, is to kind of allow them to see Jesus through us. Now, I will tell you, this does take vulnerability from the church and from the family, okay? Here's what I know. I have been in church and I've dealt with families enough to know that sometimes a family does not want you to help them. Sometimes a family does not feel safe enough to tell you what's wrong with their child. Sometimes they will be defensive when you have to say, hey, I notice your kid is struggling, right? Is there anything that we should know about? Oh, no, absolutely not. They're perfectly fine, you know? And we know they're not perfectly fine, but they can't quite be vulnerable enough, okay? And that's okay. When we show them love, hopefully, week in and week out, we're going to start to allow them to see that they can be vulnerable with us. When we approach families to say, your child is struggling, are we doing that with kindness and care instead of judgment and, and bitterness or harshness, right? How we respond can have really lasting consequences. I have had families who have come to our church to say, the last church we were at, nobody liked my kid. And they basically said he wasn't allowed to come back because he has ADHD and he couldn't sit down. They wouldn't allow him to stand in the back. They wouldn't allow him to get up and move a little bit. They just wanted him to sit and be quiet. And then we were basically told, don't come back. You know, those are the kinds of things that I don't want to stand before the Lord and him say, why did you keep that family out of church by acting like that, you know? I can't take full responsibility for everything, but to the best of my abilities, I want to be able to say that I was able to do things for that family that allowed them to see who our Father is. So when we talk about being vulnerable, Stephanie Hubach writes in her book, this was a really good book, it's called Same Lake, Different Boat, and it's a model of belonging. If you've not read this book, it's really good. She writes that when a family wants to attend a church that currently isn't taking steps of accessibility to meet their family members' needs, their request for accommodations can be made in a way that communicates either their desire or need, which obviously embraces vulnerability, or in a way that is rights-oriented or demanding. So here's the thing. You're going to have some families who go, hey, I just want to let you know my kid really struggles. Do you mind if he just stands in the back when he gets squirrely, right? Or you might have a family that says, my child has ADHD, and I expect you to do X, Y, and Z, right? So you have two different models. Both of those things require vulnerability, right? The parent is going out of their way to share something with you that you wouldn't maybe see on the outside. But in response, the leadership of the church can also respond in very different ways, right? We can either welcome, listen, and adapt and say, you know what, whatever we can do to help, let's think through ways that we can help you. We want to support your child. Or we can ignore, reject, and do self-protecting. Well, we just don't do that here. I'm sorry. There are not enough hands in this room to allow him to walk in the back. Well, that is absolutely ridiculous. He should be able to sit down for 20 minutes. It's only 20 minutes, right? There are different ways that churches can respond to this. Hubach writes that while both parties are responsible for their actions, we want parents to take accountability and not expect the church to do it all, but also the church needs to be able to accept what they need to do. The onus, for Sundays especially, is on the church as the body of Christ to initiate and pursue welcoming and belonging, even if the needs of the family are great and their approach is less than desirable. So even if you got a mom who seems like she's really brash, right? And you're like, well, who does she think she is walking in here telling us what to do? As the church, right? Following Jesus, we need to try to do our best to welcome them and to say we're going to do what we can to provide support for your family. Now, I will tell you this, that this does apply to churches of every size. I have been in really little churches that do this well. I've been in huge churches that don't do it well, even though it seems like they have a lot of the ability to do a lot. And so you don't have to feel overwhelmed by every visitor to your church. This is my encouragement to you. I've been in churches where the minute someone comes in with a child with disabilities, they think, I immediately, in that second, I've got to fix everything to make sure that family feels welcome that Sunday. I'm going to encourage you to not put that pressure on yourself, okay? A visitor is a visitor. We want them to feel welcome, but we're also going to be honest to say, gosh, it seems like your child's got some things that we're not quite prepared for today, but let us know. What can we do right now? And then be honest with them. I have told churches before, tell that family you're not ready yet, but don't let that be the end, right? Because I have had churches who will tell that family, give us six weeks, give us 3 months. We're going to find a person. We're going to find a volunteer. We're going to get a special buddy for your child. And then that never happens. And that family waits, and that family waits, and that family waits. And then finally that family says, we're done. We can't stay here because no one's moving towards helping us with our needs, right? So even though you may be small, or even if you're large, you can find short and long-term solutions to families, especially when they're committed to your community. So I really want to encourage you to do this. The families, the kids that you just wrote down this morning, more than likely, they're committed to you. Like, you know them enough that you've written their need down. Start with those people. Those people have already shown that they're going to stick with you even if we don't have anything going on right now for their kids, right? They're already invested in you. So work with them first. And I promise you that even the small things that you start now for those kids may apply to other visitors who come into the building. I have had to tell a couple of moms, like I've got my one kiddo who has the genetic disorder. She's 9, but she functions more like a 4-year-old. And so that mom, when she first came, obviously she can't be with our large group of K through 6 students. She just doesn't, her physical presence, she needs way more movement than what my structure is. So I offered to allow her to go to the preschool room. But I told her mom, I said, look, I don't have a one-to-one yet for her. I need to know what she needs. I need to know what she looks like. And then I need to train somebody to be her one-to-one. So can you give me 6 weeks? And the mom said, absolutely, I'll go in the room with her for the first 6 weeks. perfect. Her mom was in there. The teacher saw how Mia was responding. They saw what her needs were, that sometimes she pulls away and it's okay to let her sit and just be. And then as we were doing that, I was finding my youth kids who wanted to be a special buddy, and they were going in every week, and they were with the mom, but they were watching Mia. And then after 6 weeks, the mom was now able to slowly make her way back to the sanctuary. My special needs buddies were supporting Mia, and it was just a nice thing. But I didn't feel like that first week I had to drop everything and find somebody in that moment, right? So that's the thing. That's the conversations you need to have. Can you meet us halfway? Can you be with the child until we get to know them, and then can we take over from there? Whatever that looks like. We can do it. We just need to be honest, right? Sometimes churches overpromise and underdeliver. I'd much rather underpromise and overdeliver, because I don't want to say something that I can't do. That doesn't develop trust with your families. So what do we know? It often starts in children's ministry, but it shouldn't stop in children's ministry, right? What do we see about special needs kids? It often starts in kids ministry. You guys, if you're kids ministry leaders, you are the ones who are normally the first ones to reach out to help. Why? Well, because we're around the kids the most. Because we are in settings where we are interacting with them very, very frequently. We're trying to create environments that help them learn. We're seeing the behaviors. A lot of times adults with special needs can sit in a large sanctuary and do okay without anybody really noticing. But with kids, we're just constantly interacting, right? This is my Seaver, the kid in the blue shirt. That's my kiddo who's severely developmentally delayed, right? He's a part of our large group, but he's going to look differently. And I knew it from the moment I met him, that there was something that we were going to have to do to support his needs, because he didn't look like the rest of those kids. So it does start with us, but I want to remind you, and all the way up to adults, that it shouldn't stop. Kids with disabilities become teens with disabilities, become adults with disabilities. So if we're thinking about the long game of our churches, the kids that you're identifying now, we want them to still stay with their youth groups. And then we want them to still stay with our church when they become adults, or a church in some capacity. We don't want that to drop off at some point because my youth pastor doesn't like the way that they act in youth group, because they stand to the side and they don't like all the noise, so they stand by the wall. Or, the pastor in the service doesn't quite understand why they have to walk in the back. That's distracting. So we want to be able to have a culture in our churches where everybody is supported, right? Even at my school, we did a ton of things in the grammar school, and then we were seeing a big disconnect when they got to middle school. And so I had to work to really push my middle school leadership and then my high school leadership. No, these accommodations have to follow the kids all the way through. 6th to 7th grade, they didn't just all of a sudden become perfect, They weren't miraculously healed when puberty hit, I wish. But that's not how this works. This is going to be a lifelong thing. Everyone should have the same opportunities to grow in Christ-likeness, develop friendships, experience fellowship, and use their gifts to build up the church. I was at a church just a few weeks ago where there was a Down syndrome boy who is now like 19. Wonderful. Guess what he does? He's the greeter. Every single Sunday, he's opening the doors and telling people hello and handing them bulletins. That's beautiful, because he's the most friendly kid you've ever met. No filter, he just says and hugs everybody. What a perfect greeter, right? We don't look at him and think, well, he can't do that. He can't talk to people. He can give them a hug. He can say hello, welcome to church, here's your paper, right? We need to celebrate that all the way through. True disability ministry is a whole family ministry. This is something really important. From start to finish, families need support from diagnosis all the way to transition, if there is one. When the church can provide help for marriages, when they can do respite care, a lot of times parents are just exhausted all the time. When we can say, hey, Mama, why don't you run to the grocery store? I'm going to hang out with your kids for a little while you go get some groceries without anybody, right? Or providing extra time with siblings. A lot of times there's so much focus on the child with a disability that siblings often feel forgotten. So can you, as the kids ministry leaders, make sure that you're really looking and talking to those siblings as well? A lot of times they're in charge of taking care of their sibling when they're in a setting like a church, right? I know that Seavers Seaver's older brother, Ivan, he feels like he has to be his caregiver. And I have to remind Ivan, nope, Seaver can do this. We can, Miss Miranda's got it. You go enjoy your friends. You don't have to be right next to Seaver all the time. But that's how he feels. It's all ways that we can make these families feel loved by the church. We know that divorce rates are higher with families with kids with disabilities, right? It's just a given. There's so much care and need that go into kids. So, all right, so we've identified the who. You just wrote down some things. Let's think about your context, your church, really quickly. See if you can identify, there might be 3 different barriers right now that are existing in your church. There's either physical barriers, literally facility barriers. There could be social barriers, maybe the way that people talk or interact with each other, or cultural variables. A lot of times, certain cultures will look at disabilities in different ways. I don't think that we really represent that here, but I've been in contexts where different cultures have different viewpoints. What right now can you see in your church, and it's okay, I'm not going to ask you to tell me, so you can be vulnerable with people who you are with, that might prevent or does prevent families with disabilities from coming to your church? Think about some things right now. Just talk it over with the people that you're with. To just take 30 seconds. What might be either social, physical, cultural barriers that you could see right away that might be preventing somebody from coming? Mm-hmm. Ooh. 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 Oh yeah, that's a high ratio. Yeah, that's most churches' problems when you're growing. It's a good problem, but yeah, where do we put them, in the maintenance closet? Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. How many of you might have like actual church physical space? It's something that popped up on your radar. I know for me, we're portable, so we meet in a school, so we have set up and tear down every Sunday. And that was really, just that in itself was a challenge. And the other physical, I say physical, but was just communicating to a family of a special needs child, like how can we help you? I realized we don't have any signs. We don't have anything at checkout that says, like, does your child need this additional support? Make sure you let the person you're checking in know, right? A lot of times they would just show up and they'd walk in, and then I'd be like, okay, do I know, who are you? What's your name? And I didn't realize until halfway through, oh, this kiddo's got something going on. I should have asked. So that was something I had to, and that sounds so simple, but I just wasn't thinking about how am I asking for information, right? Anybody else have any kind of physical things that you can think about? Sounded like space sometimes. So just how many kids are in a classroom, just how big the rooms are, how small they are, how few rooms you have.
Even like sitting in the sanctuary, you walk in, you want to sit towards the back.
Yes.
You want to take the kiddos.
That's right.
And then it's like everybody's already taken up
We're Baptists, of course we do.
Yeah, so all that's left is like the front row.
That's a great point.
And that's intimidating, I mean, for new people in
Yes.
general, but a new family with a
Yeah.
child with.
So do you reserve rows that say for families with special needs?
Yeah, like we have a cry room.
Right. Yeah, but that's different. Yeah.
That completely sets you apart.
Correct.
From the rest of the
Well, and what if it's an 8-year-old? You know, not a baby. You don't want to have to sit in a cry room because they call it a cry room, right? It's not a needs room. It's a cry room. You know. Yeah.
When you have children in church, you're going to have interruptions.
Yes.
What's going to happen is what Jesus wants to happen that day.
That's true.
Nothing more,
That's
nothing
right.
less.
That is true.
So if a child interrupts, he didn't, I didn't catch that.
Right. Yeah.
He's still going to touch the person.
Yes.
Who's going to touch in that church.
Yes. It's very true.
So interruptions, for him, there's no interruption.
Yeah, that's a great point. And we put a lot of pressure on ourselves, right? We got to finish every activity. We have to get the lesson done. Sometimes it just doesn't happen, and you trust that the Lord's still going to make the way and still provide what they needed to hear for that day. It doesn't ruin a Sunday if you have something that doesn't go. Sometimes our greatest discussions with kids has been a rabbit trail that a kid asks a question and every kid wants to talk about that. Still focused on the kingdom, but might not have been my story that week, but that's okay. The Lord's going to work through that. So that's a great point. I would say that for most of us, ADA requires us to have all the things that our churches should have, but just be mindful of wheelchair ramps, bathrooms that are accessible to families who have children in wheelchairs, right, or adults in wheelchairs. For the most part, we don't see that, but there are still places that don't provide the best ways for people to get around just physically, making sure that you have an easy path like right now, the parking lot at our school is really bumpy and bad, and there's gravel, and we don't have a lot of parking, and so my family we have a lot of handicap, but not enough spaces, right? So my family with the wheelchair, if they're not there early enough, they're hauling her through gravel, which makes it really difficult. So just trying to, if you can at least know how many handicap, do I need to add another one in there for that family who's now regularly coming, just so they have that support. Anything socially, anything that you identify, kind of like what we're struggling with the loud noise from our sweet girl in the wheelchair, that was very hard for us. Anything that you see? Yeah.
In the past, we discussed with children's church, and kids would run that down. Some of the elders would walk that long. Now it's more of a listen to what God's doing.
Yeah, I love that. So not judging them for an expectation of behavior. Yeah, that's great. Sometimes that run is needed. They're about to go sit for a few minutes. Let them run. That's blessed are the merciful on the teachers, right? Yeah, if you don't let your kids run before you have like 20 or 25 minutes of teaching, let them just take a lap or play freeze tag for 30 seconds. Let them get some energy out. So very good. Well, some things that can be practical for you, and this is actually, you're going to see this in your Be All In packet. If you need to be able to have some way of identifying a child's needs, you're going to see the back few pages of this ebook. There are 3 pages that are different structures, but you could kind of use whichever ones you needed. But these 2 here, there's kind of a blank one and then a blue one. These are 2 specific ways that you can gather information. You can add this if you use Planning Center. You could add these questions when a family comes and checks their kid in for the first time. These questions can pop up. So if it says, does your child have any special needs we need to be aware of? If they say no, it won't pop up. If they say yes, it can trigger additional questions. Or what I do, because we have so many people trying to check in, I can't really take over a check-in station, we just don't have that many. I will ask the family after their first Sunday, when they're coming to pick their child up, I will ask a family at checkout, Was there we can't wait to have your child back next week or whenever you come back. Was there anything we needed to know before their next visit? And if they say, well, yeah, I mean, there's a few things, then I'll hand them one of these. I just kind of put my logo on it and added the questions. I will ask them to bring this back with them on their next visit, just so that I am fully able and prepared to understand what the child needs, right? If a child has an issue where, like an OCD, I have a kiddo who needs to go to the bathroom pretty regularly, they're not actually using the bathroom. It's just the need to get out of the environment because of some sensory and OCD stuff. So I needed to know that. This child's not just trying to get out of the room to be squirrely or to act silly or because they don't like me. It's because they actually have a need to move. So something like this would be really helpful. Have a question like, our church cares for the success and safety of each participant. Does your child have any allergies? Make sure especially that you know food allergies if you're serving a snack, right? That's huge. That could be life or death. Medical conditions, learning differences, special needs, or disabilities that we should be aware of. If the answer is yes, then you want to have them fill out one of these forms. And then you can decide based on the needs what environment they're going to be best suited in. So for Mia, I didn't feel like I had to be pressured to have her in my K-6 environment. Even though she's 9, she's not going to work there. Right? She loves the preschool room. The preschool kids love her. They give her hugs. They think she's great. And I didn't feel at all after communicating with Mom that I was doing her a disservice by not having her with her age peers, right? That's what we need to do. It needs to be specialized according to the needs of the child. So you get to know that by asking them to fill one of these out. So please make copies of this or make your own, whatever you think is going to help you. Some other churches that I've seen, we don't do this just because I really know my kids pretty well, but they will put that information on a lanyard for that child. So the only reason why I worry about that is because I feel like if every kid doesn't have a lanyard, I don't want to make all of a sudden the kids with special needs have a lanyard, nobody else has one. So I would say if you're going to do this, it might be great to just let everybody have one, and that's wonderful. For every child, you can put name, contact info. We have the printed out stickers, and so stickers will also include like medical allergies and things. So you can put that in Planning Center, what do you want on the sticker? But you can list the things on here. The reason why a lot of churches do that is because they have teachers that may not know the kid because they have different teachers week in and week out. And so you'll also see goals. So goals are going to be what's on the next slide, and that's what we call an IDP. So we talked about an IEP, that's an individualized education plan. A lot of churches, because they want to know, how can I reach a child spiritually the same way I'm reaching a child educationally? A lot of churches will talk with the parents about what's called an IDP, which is an individualized discipleship plan for a child. So for a child like Seaver, I'm speaking with the mom and I'm saying, I know that Seaver can't memorize this full big scripture over the next 6 weeks. Can we shorten it? Can I give him the preschool version to give, and you take home and work with him on that? What can I expect for him to understand from a lesson? He doesn't do the worksheets, right? And I'm okay with that. I give him a coloring sheet. And so it's still the same picture from the story we're learning, but he's just coloring while all the rest of the kids are filling out, disciple names and all those types of things. So what an individualized discipleship thing is, it's just allowing you to say, this is what it looks like for this child to have success in the kids ministry. Okay, if I reach these goals this year, then I have done what I know I can do with that child. Okay, it's okay if you don't have time to do this. I completely understand. This is a lot. But how are you measuring what that child is getting if you're teaching and you're not quite sure exactly what this looks like? How are you accommodating what that child is doing? Because what you do when you hand a child with dyslexia who can't read, when you hand him the same worksheet that's a big thing of words and a big fill in the blank, that kid's done. And they're like, you don't know me at all. I can't even read what this says, right? So how are you at least recognizing that this is too hard for me and making something that's a little easier for them, whether it's a word bank, right, or something else, something that they can literally copy. For a couple of my kids, I give them the worksheet, but I give them the worksheet with all the answers, and they copy from one worksheet to the other. They're still getting the information, but they don't have to know how to spell Thaddeus, right? They're copying the word Thaddeus from this paper to this paper, and they're still doing the same thing that the rest of the kids are doing. So how do you kind of think through what are ways that I can support them? This also, I wanted to bring this up. This, and even the forms before that, communicates to your family, to your disability family, that they matter, that they are seen, and that you care about their child as an individual, okay? It does not take much to put out that olive branch that says this is a church who wants to help you, right? And we care about your child. We care about their spiritual needs. Again, if a child's really severely disabled, this probably won't be applicable. Your job is to care for them and to provide safety and love, right? But this is for kids that are kind of able to do some, if not all, of what you're doing. So there's a couple ways that you can incorporate this as we start to wrap up here. There's some ways to incorporate disability ministry at your church, and I want to go through all three. This does not mean, again, that this is what you have to do tomorrow, okay? It's just to get an idea of what do you think is going to work best at your church, okay? The first one is what we call inclusive. This is the model that I do simply because we don't have a ton of space to pull kids out based on their needs. So an inclusive model is a children's ministry class of same age, maybe peers. So typically, depending on the need, they're going to still be in their groups based on their age. And you often get support from a teen or an adult buddy who's trained and prepared to meet that student's additional needs. So that's what we do. All of those kids that I mentioned, the Down syndrome students, all of them, they are all in their same groups, except for Mia. But she really is in her same age peers developmentally, if that makes sense. So not physically, developmentally. But they are not separated. They are in our classes full on for the entire Sunday morning that they're there. And we have supports that come into the room instead of pulling them out of the room. Does that make sense? So we call that inclusive. Specialized, there are some churches who do this. I love this. We don't have the facility for it, nor do we really have a student yet who needs this if there is that opportunity. I was actually prepared to think about specialized with Mia because I didn't know how she would do in the preschool setting. The only worry I have about specialized is there's very little social aspect to a specialized setting, because usually the child's going to be in there alone or maybe with only one other child. And there's something beautiful about the interaction of regular kids with special needs kids. So this can be done if it's absolutely necessary. So it's a self-contained class that's designed for students who benefit from having a very different curriculum, so a whole different kind of setup of what you teach, and a space that meets their needs. This is often a very sensory-friendly classroom. So this is going to be a classroom that doesn't have a whole lot of stuff in it that can harm the student. It might be full of soft toys. It could be a room that doesn't have a lot on the walls. A lot of times, kids with sensory issues are very overloaded by children's ministry environments. We're loud, we've got music playing, there's toys everywhere, kids are running around, jumping, having fun. But to a kid with special needs who has sensory OCD, even ADHD, that input of all those senses, whoo, man, it really can mess them up. So this is a quiet space for a child who has to be in there the whole time. Or you can do a hybrid model, which is really great. A lot of times a church, because they can't put every kid in there full time, they will have a quiet room, right, which I appreciate. That could even be a cry room if it's close by, but normally it's separate with their kids. And so there's a hybrid model where a kid with special needs can maybe be in the large group setting for teaching, but once that's done, because it's so overwhelming, they then go with their special person to the quiet room where they do some different activities that kind of regulate them back down. So there's less kids, there's times for them to just chill, there's not a whole lot going on. So it's a different model of in and out, okay? So those are kind of your three options when it comes to kids with special needs. So for inclusion, this is another picture. That's my Emmy Kate in the purple shirt. You can see there she has Downs. She's wonderful. She answers questions. She fully understands the stories. So she's right in this inclusion model. I would never want to separate her from her peers. She loves all her friends. But for inclusion, the parents' goal is that they want their kids to be safe and loved and have fun at church, right? That's the goal. For us, in the inclusion model, we want to communicate the gospel to every child in a way that they understand and in an environment where they feel comfortable, okay? So when I'm including kids like Emmy Kate, I understand that when she raises her hand to answer a question, I've got to give her a few minutes to answer it. And I have to get like this, because she can't speak well enough that everybody hears her. So I listen to her give me her answer. I paraphrase it, and then I stand up and say, Emmy Kate just said, da, 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 right? And that includes her answer with all the rest of the kids. I don't say, no, Emmy Kate, it's okay, we'll talk later because I don't have time right now to listen to you. Her answers are just as great, and they're spot on usually. She understands the Bible story. So I just understand that there are gonna be moments that I have to give her time. For Seaver, because we meet in a cafeteria, my kids just all sit on a floor, we don't have chairs. And so I've got, 50 kids all spread out on this big cafeteria floor. And Seaver, he has to lay down and he has to move like this. So he knows that he has a special spot to the side, that's his wiggle spot, and he does whatever he wants. And every once in a while I'll go, hey Seaver, and he'll be like, I'm good. And I'm like, okay, you're listening. And he knows that that's his signal. He can't be silly and he can't distract other people, but he's got to move. That's just his way of regulating himself. And so I'm not getting upset about that. I understand that that's his need. So that's kind of your goals for inclusion. The other thing you heard with inclusion, and this is a huge one, I think this is, for us, it has been a game changer for being able to handle kids with disabilities. We have a lot of youth. I use 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th graders, and they love to be special buddies. And so what I do is every year we do a quick training on what does it mean to be a special buddy. I teach them about, obviously safety and policy procedures. They're never going to be alone in a room with a child. They're never going to go in the bathroom with the child. The adult has to do that, right? But I'm also training them on compassion, on how do I redirect a child who's struggling, what things can I do to help them. And then I pair up my most special needs children who have, like for Seaver, he has a friend, he has a special buddy, and they will sit there with a bag, and they may have a fidget that Seaver can play with. I have another child with autism who's pretty nonverbal. He loves animals, so his special buddy sits in the room with us right next to William, and anytime William's starting to get a little fussy, he pulls out a new toy. So it's a lion. Oh, and then William loves the lion. He's listening, but he's holding the lion, right? For some kids with sensory, you may have a pair of earphones in the buddy bag. So whatever that buddy needs. But those special buddies make really great connections with the kids. They love seeing each other outside of church, like, hey, there's my buddy. And it provides support to the grown-ups, because grown-ups, there are so many kids that even regular kids are gonna get squirrely, right? So I can't do special needs and regular kids. So how can I get my youth? What we're finding too is it builds so much compassion, right? It allows those youth to really see the needs of kids, and they'll be like, I had no idea, like that was so fun. I really love her, even though she can't talk, I have a couple girls that are Mia's special buddies, and they love her. They hug her, they just love playing with her. So this can be a one-on-one or a floater buddy, so however your needs are. They can carry their little buddy bag with things in it. Some buddies will help them fill out their worksheets. Some buddies will just help them with friends. Like one of my buddies goes with a child who has autism who doesn't do well with making a friend, and so they'll go with her and be like, hey, can we play with you? Emmeline wants to play with you. And so they'll sit Emmeline down, and then Emmeline can start to interact with friends. She won't do that on her own because of her needs. We see this with Moses and Aaron, right? Think about that. Aaron was Moses' special buddy. I hate to say it that way, but Moses had such a hard time communicating. He needed someone to be his advocate. He needed someone to be his sidekick, his mouthpiece, his advocate, right? And so that's the way we see that modeled, that Jesus didn't just heal Moses of his inability. He said, Aaron, you're going to support Moses. He's my guy, but he needs help. And so we see that modeled a lot in the Bible. Here's some pictures of specialized classes. Again, this this is my dream. I don't know that it'll ever happen, but it would be wonderful to have a room where you can have a ball pit, where you can have a trampoline for kids who need movement. That's a kind of a vestibular regulation. Some kids need that up and down motion to help them regulate themselves. Quiet space. You'll see there's not a lot on the walls. There's not going to be a lot happening. There's going to be no music. It says in 1 Corinthians, Paul talks about how speaking in tongues does not benefit everyone. But in verse 19, he writes, "Nevertheless, in church, I would rather speak 5 words with my mind in order to instruct others than 10,000 words in a tongue." Meaning that even if we don't teach anything to these special needs kids, but we give them a place where they understand 5 words, right? Then that's much better than them sitting in a room where nothing is being taught and nothing's getting through to them. It is like we're speaking in tongues to them. So here's an example. This is actually the church where Sandra goes to now. That is her 19-year-old son. And he goes to that sensory classroom every week, and he loves his ball pit, and he plays. And so they do a hybrid model, so he actually goes into like a young adults class for a little while with a special buddy, and then he goes to the sensory room when they start their discussion because he's not verbal, but he loves that space. So again, that's not a huge church. Their church has like 120 people in it, but they have decided that that's important for them to do for him. Here's just a few more examples. You can see not a lot on the walls, just making it clean, simple, safe, pillows, things like that. And then this hybrid approach, so some examples, you might have everybody in your Sunday school class, right? But then when you go to where you're singing, doing worship, doing games, anything like that, those kids may need to go to a different room because that's too much for them. Or you might flip-flop that. You might have small group time in your sensory room, and then they love to come out and do worship and sing and be a part of the big group fun, right? Just depends on the kids' needs. For some kids, they desire the social, and other kids can't handle the social. You'll see them break down, right? Or really kind of back up into a wall. So however that looks for you, the inclusive model is usually the most used. The other thing I want to make sure that you guys understand when we're dealing with kids with special needs is the need for policies and for safety, right? I think we think about that for every kid. Hopefully we're doing policies and procedures that keep our kids safe, but it's especially important with kids with special needs because you could accidentally do something that you didn't intend to because you just didn't know. So good communication, obviously, with your volunteers. Everybody's on the same page. If we end up with a special needs kids that's new, I will email everybody on my volunteer team. Even if they don't serve for another 6 weeks, I will let them know this child is here are their needs, look for him or her, understand that this is what the parents have communicated, just want you to be prepared when you walk in that week. Also communicating with the parents. They agree to a level of help by leaving their kids in your care. Okay, so you need to make sure that what they are expecting from you is also clear with you and that you agree to that expectation. I have had situations where unfortunately I didn't say that we were going to do X, Y, and Z, and the parent didn't know I was going to do X, Y, and Z, and they were like, well, you didn't tell me, and I could have told you my kid would have that's why they broke down. Right? And I just didn't know. And so we have to have these clear lines of communication with parents because they have expectations the same way that we do. And I never want to do something that they were not expecting. Your insurance policy, I know that's kind of dry, but just so you're aware, your insurance policy should cover those with disabilities just like it does every other person on your campus or at a church event. But you do need to make sure you're addressing things like the toileting policy. If you have a 10-year-old who's still in a pull-up, right, there's going to be a toileting policy for that, just like you have with your babies. So obviously a female needs to go into the bathroom with that child. Only a female. You need to make sure no one else is in the bathroom. You need to have an adult on the outside. All those types of things that you would with a toddler, right? Because we assume when a child with special needs goes to the bathroom, they can do it themselves. They may not be able to, but the older they get, the harder that is with handling just abuse and stuff like that. Make sure you have a plan if they have high medical needs. So for example, with Evangeline, the mom has just said over and over, I have offered for someone to take Evangeline and put her in a room where she can just be with someone, but the mom has been pretty clear that her feeding tube machine tends to break down quite frequently, and she does not want to put that pressure on us as a church to have to fix it if something were to go haywire. And so she just doesn't feel comfortable yet with that, and I totally respect that. I don't want to be liable for a broken tube or something. So if you do have someone who wants you to care for a child like that, make sure someone is fully trained on how all of that medical equipment would work. Be aware of security for eloping children. I don't know if you ever had one of those before, but they just take off. They just take off running, right? Fight or flight is fight, flight, or freeze. So these are the kids that are gonna flee. And so do you have a policy in place? Do you have locked doors so that they can't get out? What happens if one does go out a door? I have had a child that's done that before. I will tell you that especially the next one, develop a plan for aggressive or self-injurious participants. You need to be able to know what happens if someone starts hurting someone else or starts hurting themselves. Do you have a plan for removing the rest of the kids out of the room? And do you have a plan for how you're going to try to help that kid not hurt themselves or others? I, being an educator, have been trained in the safety restraint models, but your volunteers will not. Please remind your volunteers, do not put your hands on those kids. Go find someone, go get their parents, do something that at least tries to keep them from injuring themselves until a parent can arrive. But you never want to restrain a child unless you've been trained on how to do that and you have permission. So again, getting this paper filled out, if they say anything about what happens if they have a meltdown, you can ask them, are we allowed to restrain them? But only then you should be trained in how to restrain properly. And I know that sounds crazy, but it's happened. I'm telling you, I've had to do it. I've had to do it at church. And so I had permission to do so. Consider CPI training and obviously ministry safe. If you're not actively training your volunteers across the board, special needs or not, you need to be doing that. Every person should be trained in ministry safe for the sexual abuse policies and understanding what it looks like to keep your kids safe. CPI is another training for children with inclusive needs. All right, so really quickly before I'm going to skip these case studies. So I want you to take 2 minutes, because that's all we've got left before we finish up. Take 2 minutes to talk about where can you start or where can you move next. So thinking about your ministry right now as it stands, what is a next step for you to move to a ministry model of disability in your church? Again, it's not going to look the same for any church in this room. So thinking about your context, talk with your people. What's a next step that we need to do? It could be physical, it could be accommodations on the teaching, it could be communication with parents, it could just be getting forms. Another way to think about it too is how can we as a church start to support our families at a higher level? Any ideas on how we can support families? So this Be All In ebook that I gave you, we did a kind of 10,000 foot level overview of what was in here today, but I want to encourage you to make sure that you go more in depth and read this book. It will go a lot more into what it looks like to be aware, to be accepting, to be accessible at your church. It gives you great examples. I would also really encourage you, if you've never talked about this with your volunteers, that would be a great next step. If nothing else, can we have a quick volunteer meeting after church one afternoon or some type of online training, whatever it looks like, to say, here's what we know about special needs and here's how we're going to help our kids, right? And this is a great way to communicate that information. You could just go through this book together. It would be just wonderful to talk about it with a lot of your volunteers, they know it's there, and they actually will be excited that you're thinking about it, but they need the information. You can't just take this yourself and hope to know every single kid. You have to constantly have that communication. So please do this. A couple other resources I wanted to show you before you leave today. Lifeway has launched a brand new special needs website. It's wonderful. There are training videos. They talk about the IDPs. They talk about ways that their curriculum, for example, the Gospel Project, they have individualized different types of lessons for kids with special needs. If you didn't already know, they're VBS. You can purchase a special needs track of VBS that goes along with what you're doing with other kids. And so they are working very hard at trying to make sure that all of us, if we use their curriculum, I'm sure other curriculums do too, but free resources, trainings, you can send things to your volunteers, just a link to a video to watch. Different podcasts to talk about it, but this is a great website to go to. I think it's lifeway.com/special needs, but just Google Lifeway special needs and it'll pop you up right there. The other one that I wanted to point you to, and this is where you'll find this ebook, is sandrapeoples.com. So it doesn't show that there, but Sandra, S-A-N-D-R-A, Peoples, P-E-O-P-L-E-S.com. This is Sandra's website. She has a ton of stuff. If you see the tabs along the top, if you click on book, that is going to take you to the Accessible Church website. That's going to have a ton of resources that are in that book that you can download for free. I would recommend you buy the book, but it also gives you a ton of resources. And then if you hover over the 4 churches, tons of stuff there that you can download, including this Be All In book. So that is available there on her website. And then for families, I loved this. So if you have a special needs family, send them to this website and say, look, for you, for your family, there are all kinds of cool resources on what you can do to help us as a church. So it gives them ways to communicate with your church, ways to feel supported by your church, resources to help your kids learn at church, right? So it's a partnership. We want to think about this as a partnership, and so she sees it that way. That's a wonderful tool to have for you guys to talk about that with your volunteers. If you ever need anything from me, I am here to help you. I am not the guru, okay? I don't claim to be. I have as much experience as I've been given so far, but I am happy to talk you through things if you want to create or implement anything. If you just need somebody to talk to, I have a lot of phone calls that are just, I have this family, we had this issue, what do you think I should do, right? And so I'll walk you through some things that I've dealt with as an educator, also as a church leader. Again, not that I have any answers, but I'm a partner with you, and I just want to be there to support you in the great work that you're doing for your kids. We encourage and really love that you guys get together as often as you do. I think it's really important that all of you in your areas know each other and can call each other and can say, are you experiencing this? We are. How can we help? So try to stay connected with one another as much as you can. I'm far enough away that I can't just come to your church real quick, right? But you guys can help each other, and I think that's really important. So are there any questions or anything that you want to share or say before I pray and wrap us up? I hope this has been helpful. Yeah, absolutely. No, happy to be here. Happy to be here. Well, let's pray real quick and then we'll get on the road and back to our regularly scheduled events. God, thank you so much for today. Thank you for the heart of these leaders to take time out of their weekend to come and spend just a few minutes learning about the beautiful creation that every single person in our church represents, and that we are all made in God's image. And I love the fact that you love children, and I love the fact that even children who think differently, learn differently, present differently, Lord, are so loved and desired by you. And so thank you that they are in church, God. Thank you that you have given us kiddos and families who have decided to connect. Above all else, Lord, I pray for each specific church that's sitting here, that they will be able to reach out and touch a community that is needing the hope of the gospel, and especially those families who have disability issues and needs, God, that you will allow each of these churches to be a light for them, that they will be able to step into the church setting and know that they are seen and loved and appreciated and supported, God. Because we know that they feel isolated and alone. So help us to figure out ways to connect with them, whether that's through the school system or at community events. If they see a family with a special needs child, that we can go out of our way to invite them to church. We can go out of our way to communicate that we are a family that loves them and knows that they are important and that they're not doing this life alone. I pray for each and every church represented here and also in this association, that we can continue to love our kids and share the love of Jesus with them. We're so thankful that you allow us to partner with you in ministry, God. You don't need us, and yet we have the privilege of serving you week in and week out. So encourage us. Help us to know that you are in control and that you are just using us as vessels to spread the gospel. It's in your name that we pray. Amen. Thanks, guys. Have a good Sunday or Saturday.